Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Maximum Downforce, the second episode of the 2022 Formula One World Championship. I am your host, Will Knight, and joining me, as always, a revolving door of panellists throughout the season. Joining me today, Maris Baker, Harry Parkhouse, and Lewis Bassendale. The season has officially kicked off. Formula One is back in business, and we only have a few days to wait until the next race in Saudi Arabia. We're going to be taking you through every little detail of the season opener. And what better place to start off than finally it's wrapped up. It's finally done. The FIA report. We wanted to get this done before pre-season, but now it's officially been released. Lewis, you're new to the show. Just give me your thoughts on the fact that it's finally done. We can finally look ahead to the new season. Max Verstappen is the world champion. But realistically, a world champion which some people are contributing to human error.
Can I go controversial and say here the report didn't go far enough? I read the conclusions, and while what the report had recommended has already been done, it didn't go far enough. If I was in charge of the FIA, I would have personally fined both Mercedes and Red Bull for different reasons. Mercedes, I would have fined for bringing the sport into disrepute with the way it acted with the legal challenge, threat, and the sort of actions in the media post the race. And with Lewis Hamilton's, I would say, childish silence. He had the right to go silent for a while, but the way he went silent to the media full stop was slightly childish. And Red Bull for the way Jonathan Wheatley acted during the season. It sort of corrupted the result, in my opinion. As a neutral, it made Formula One a bit sad to see all these new fans getting upset because he sort of corrupted the result by persuading, ineffective, the referee, in some of football terms, to, I don't know, change the rules and look at the rules, and he sort of pressured him to creating this new way just for the show of it, and then that played into Red Bull hands. So I would fine both teams considerately. However, I'm happy that the report is done. Get this buried. We've got new rules, new teams. No, not sorry, new drivers rather than new teams, sorry. To, I don't know, make F1 2022 the new start of the new generation. Hopefully the new fans from 2021 have not switched off and are actually switched in for the new rules, and maybe it's a new pecking order and have got excited about that rather than disappointed with the report and the fiasco that was 2021's Abu Dhabi Grand Prix.
Chris, in recent times, the Formula One community has become, I think it's safe to say, a bit more toxic. F1 Twitter, for an example. Do you think that now the report has been released, this is going to calm down in relation to Hamilton and Verstappen, or the more likely scenario where they continue talking about this and arguing about this in every comment section possibly for seasons to come?
Yeah, I think as F1 fans, I think we would all like to move on and sort of have a clean slate. Unfortunately, I think in the world of media, they'll always talk about it. You know, even we got to Bahrain and some of the pre-show things were still about Abu Dhabi, and I think we do need to leave it in the past. Obviously, it's something that everybody needs to learn from, but I think it's one of those examples where everybody needs to sort of take a step back and go, right, new season, clean slate, and we can sort of not forget what happened, but think, right, we've got these amazing drivers and we want to have an amazing season of racing. Let's not let something that happened last year affect how we view this season and this year's racing, because as we've seen already, it is looking to be another amazing season. So I think, yeah, it will never go away because, you know, you still see fans today arguing about, you know, Senna and Prost, things that Michael did, things that Lewis did maybe even a few years ago now. People will always have opinions on it, but I think, and even though this was one of the most controversial things, we need to move on from it because there's so many news stories and more uplifting stories in the sport right now that I think people should be focusing on.
Harry, what are your comments in terms of this response that Max Verstappen, you've joked about it in the past, is an asterisk champion? Obviously, the history books people will be saying that he only won because of that reason, because of Michael Massey's so-called interference with the race as a whole. But you can attribute that to so many things. Senna, you can say he only won 1990 because he cannoned into Alain Prost. The same with Prost in 89. Schumacher in Adelaide on Damon Hill in 94. Do you think it's fair to call him this?
Absolutely not, in my opinion. The reason why this whole thing has come about in the first place is because when you're in a title challenge like that against a rival team, there's always going to be someone who comes out upset at the end of it. And because it was such a controversial decision at the end of the season that ultimately decided the fate of the end of the championship, there was always going to be one team that was upset, whether it was Red Bull, over it's Mercedes. I think that if it was the other way around and Hamilton won the title due to that sort of um, the mannerisms in which it happened due to Michael Massey's decision, effectively, then would Verstappen fans be going on social media, Twitter, saying that Hamilton's an asterisk world champion? Probably they would. I would argue that Hamilton obviously has won titles before, many titles, and that's not going to stop the other opposing fans from saying that against the driver, because when it comes to it at the end of the day, there's always going to be one team who is not enjoying the outcome of the season and has not enjoyed the final race. And because it was so controversial, there's a reason why Hamilton fans, Mercedes fans would be angry and targeting potentially Verstappen. But whether that is just is a completely different question. Max Verstappen, as he rightly pointed out in an interview, he led the most laps that season, most pole positions. He was by far the superior driver, in my opinion, in that season to Lewis Hamilton. Yes, Hamilton, many people say, oh, Hamilton's in the fastest car, Verstappen's in the fastest car. It doesn't matter. Verstappen's statistics during the 2021 season showed that he was slightly better than Lewis Hamilton, whether that's car related, whether that's driver related. Many people can have their opinions on that. But in my opinion, people who would call Max Verstappen an asterisk world champion are ridiculous. And they are jealous that their driver did not win the championship, and it's a stupid claim to say. He won the title. In the history books, it will go down that the 2021 World Championship was won by Max Verstappen, and he is the current Drivers' World Champion. That's all I really have opinions on the matter for that.
Now, I'm going to say this for the third and final time. Fingers crossed we can now put Abu Dhabi aside and focus on the new season of Formula One, but likely this will be brought up sometime in the future. One man who couldn't focus on his 2022 season and couldn't kick it off in style, Harry, I'll stick with you for this question. Sebastian Vettel. He missed the opening round of the season after catching COVID-19. Not the best start for the German in what could possibly be his final season in Formula One, with his contract running at the end of this year.
Yeah, I have mentioned it to you, Will, actually, in saying that I do believe that this will be Seb Vettel's last season within the sport. I think that it's a massive shame to see him go out at which is likely to be a team that is struggling at the back with the likes of McLaren and Williams this season. But I really think that when he gets back in that car, hopefully for Jeddah, that he's not going to like what he sees. He's not going to like the feel of the car, and he's certainly not going to like the porpoising down the straights that's apparently costing them half a second, Aston Martin claim. But even with that half a second, are they going to be anywhere near where they want to be? Absolutely not. It's a very poor start to the season for Aston Martin as a whole. Obviously, when you've got the likes of Nico Hülkenberg as a reserve driver, you're on the up. I mean, is he the same level as Seb Vettel? Many people would think no, but is he better than Lance Stroll? It's an interesting question. I mean, he outqualified Stroll, and of course, Hülkenberg did finish last of the finishers, so maybe Stroll had the better race pace. And the fact that Hülkenberg didn't have as much testing time probably ended up meaning that his race pace wasn't as superior as his teammates. So it was a tough start to the season for Aston Martin, especially when seeing that their main driver and their four-time world champion winning driver is out with COVID. And then the race-wise, it just got worse. Both drivers out in qualifying. It was a horrible start to the season. And I said to you, Will, I don't want Seb driving that car for the rest of the year. I want him to go out in a blaze of glory. I want him to go out with at least a podium this season. And that is very, very unlikely to happen. It's really disappointing to see. You know how much I adore Sebastian Vettel as a driver. I think he's world class, and I think he's a world class human being as well. Who all I can say for that is that I hope he sticks around in Formula One, which I would imagine he will. I hope he does anyway for the foreseeable future when he's not a driver. But as you said, Will, his contract is running out, and whether Aston Martin are going to renew it or go for a younger driver maybe to partner Lance Stroll, because let's be honest, Stroll wasn't going for a long time. It's yet to be seen, but Vettel having to retire in not a very good manner. The Aston Martin last year, there were struggles. They said that this year's going to be a lot better. There was a lot of hype for them. They were the first team to actually reveal their car and their challenger, and a proper reveal as well. So you would have thought there was some confidence within the team, but going into it, it's been poor. It's a really poor start, and I don't really know how they're going to get any further up the grid because they seem such a long way off. And I'm sure we'll touch on later, but all the Mercedes engine cars do seem a long way off. So it's a real shame to see. And if Vettel does retire, it's also a big shame for me because I won't really have anyone who I'm supporting in the sport next year. But either way, it's a really tough start for Aston Martin.
Lewis, Nico Hülkenberg was drafted in to replace Vettel. Just give me your thoughts on how he performed as a whole throughout the weekend, out-qualifying Stroll, but ultimately ending up last in the Grand Prix.
He didn't obviously have any testing time on that car, obviously because he wasn't in Barcelona or the Bahrain tests. But he performed, in my opinion, well enough. Yes, he outqualified Stroll, but he fell back in the race, probably because he hadn't done a full race distance since October, November 2020. He hasn't properly done the distance. So it was probably just down to like muscle fatigue or something that he just couldn't really keep up the pace. And as well as that car is naturally just behind in general, maybe it's because of the engine isn't as pacey or hasn't got as much speed as, for example, the Ferrari-powered cars, or maybe there's some flaws in the design with that raised nose. So it could be car issues, but I mainly think it's down to just him not having that time to do a full race distance in over 2 years.
Beres, there's still doubts on whether Seb will be back for Saudi Arabia. Do you think Hülkenberg is the perfect option to be drafted back in? And if so, how do you think he can perform at the street track compared to his return to Formula One?
Yeah, I think he probably is the perfect fit for that team, and mainly because of his experience in the sport. And I think especially the excitement he brings with fans, and everybody wants to see him do well. Obviously, love him to get a podium, but that's not looking likely. But I think the excitement he brings with him and the fact that we know he's a good driver, he was in Formula One for a long time. It's obviously not been that recently that he's had a full-time seat, but he's still, he's still fit enough. He still understands it. And as he's the reserve driver, he understands that car to an extent. So I think to bring him back again for a second week would make the most sense if obviously Seb couldn't, because he's now done a race distance and qualifying, and he's got sort of all the data from those sessions, and he probably understands the car more than he did before. So I think to bring him back again would be the wisest decision. And I think from a media point of view as well, that's probably the best decision they can make, because it's one of those headlines that people want to see Hülkenberg back, because he's one of those drivers that's sort of lovable and you want to see him, and he's always, got a smile on his face. So yeah, if that does happen, which I guess some people will want him to do another race, but obviously it would be great to have Seb on the grid again. So yeah, I think Hülkenberg would be the number one choice.
Now we can finally get into reviewing the race weekend. Ferrari, Lewis. Ferrari are back on top, a 1-2, a pole position in the opening race of the season, and whenever they've done this, they've always gone on to win the championship. Do you think they can make that stick in 2022?
To be honest with you, I'm personally slightly surprised from Ferrari, knowing that, for example, whenever in testing over the last few seasons, they've said, oh, we've got this fastest car, oh, it's going to be amazing, Ferrari are going to be world champions. They've slightly underdelivered, but to get a 1-2 was amazing, and to be honest with you, I'm happy for them. Ferrari and F1 both obviously need them at the front. F1 needs it for marketing power and sort of historical power. And obviously Ferrari need them, well, because it's Ferrari. I just hope that this sticks, because the last time Ferrari, for example, got a 1-2 on the opening of the season, 2010, they lost it at the final race. So we've just got to hope that they can stick this, and also that they don't walk it and that they're pushed to the end, so we have an exciting season. And also it's a clean finale, because we don't want two really controversial finales back to back. That's going to be really detrimental for the wider public image of Formula One as a whole.
Whereas, Harry, their main rivals, Red Bull Racing, it appeared that they have the pace to win this World Championship. Max Verstappen dueling with Charles Leclerc. Can I just say, what a fantastic battle between those two as well. These regulations really are doing their job. We'll get to that later. But overall, a double DNF. Rumors circulating on multiple different reasons why these cars could have retired. Pierre Gasly retired as well. It seems possibly the fuel pump, an FIA standardized part, failed on both cars. I'm not sure if that's true. That's what I've been hearing on Twitter through different people, through different sources. Either way, it's really not a good start to the season. 44 points behind, and they've only gone through one race.
Yeah, it's a real struggle to start a season like that, considering that Red Bull, as you said, do have the pace to be fighting Ferrari this season. Whether Perez has that pace yet is yet to be seen. It looks like at the moment a case of the number one drivers versus the number two drivers, like it was with Bottas and Perez and Hamilton and Verstappen last year. But I do think Sainz has a little bit in him as well, so maybe Ferrari can bring the fight to Verstappen as well. But on the topic of Max Verstappen, yeah, Ferrari did get the 1-2, but let's be honest, it was due to bad luck from Red Bull. Either bad luck or, as many people have been saying, Verstappen's pushed that car too hard. I'm not sure if I necessarily agree with that, but Verstappen has had a fair amount of mechanical DNFs over his years within Formula One, especially with the main Red Bull team. And it was a shame to see him drop out of the race, if I'm honest, because as you said, that's a massive gap that they're going to have to claw back to Ferrari now. And even Mercedes, with Mercedes finishing in 3-4, that's a huge amount of points to lose in just one round. So it wouldn't have been as bad if Sergio Perez didn't have that spin due to his engine cutting out at the last lap. So it was a harsh reality, really, from Red Bull. After the highs at the end of last season, it looked like they still have the pace. It looks like Verstappen still has that pace over a race to fight the likes of Leclerc and Sainz. And it looks like we do have a title fight on our hands. However, as much as I do say that, that is 25 points lost on Charles Leclerc, or 26 actually, because he got the fastest lap, and 18 points lost on Carlos Sainz already. So, let alone the constructors, the drivers is still a long way away for both Red Bull drivers, Verstappen and Perez. So, it's a really difficult one to conjure how Red Bull need to find this whole race pace now throughout the season. Yes, it is a long season, but they need to constantly be beating Ferrari. They can't afford to finish second behind them like Verstappen sort of did at the end of last season. They need to go out and get wins and hope that Ferrari either have mechanical engine problems of their own or battles get a bit too intense, which, let's be honest, with Verstappen and Leclerc, they have in the past. Think back to Austria, and even in their karting days. It's certainly an interesting dynamic to see Charles Leclerc back up there as well, fighting with the likes of Max Verstappen. And it's an interesting one to call. I mean, we did the predictions in the first podcast, and I predicted George Russell to win the world title. So let's be honest, that's not going to happen. If Verstappen, as much as you could say that he might have gone into the sort of season as relative favourite, if not, Hamilton would be up there in the Ferraris. But at the moment, you look to see with the Ferrari's pace and Leclerc's racecraft as well is one thing I would want to touch on later on. But it's an interesting dynamic to see, and the fact that Red Bull have this massive amount of points to catch up is a tricky one. And on the sort of topic of the Red Bull powertrains as well, Will, as you said, they all look to be relatively similar incidents, but at the time, as you said on Twitter and on social media, they've been saying that there's a whole multitude of reasons. We saw Verstappen during the race complaining about steering and complaining about having to cool the car down with his brake temps. It looks to me like that Red Bull is not 100% confident in itself at the moment, which shows that not necessarily Verstappen could be either. So it's a hard one to call. And as you said, with Gasly DNFing and Tsunoda being the only one out of the four actually finishing the race, it proves worrying for Red Bull if they can't get these powertrains. Of course, these new powertrains that they're manufacturing, if they can't get them up to the speed in which Ferrari have this year, then they will face a real battle from the offset.
Ferris, their 2021 rivals, Mercedes, meanwhile, On the down, I think it's safe to say they're not very happy with the way that this season opener has gone for them. But one of my favourite quotes from Peter Bonington, the 2018 Azerbaijan Grand Prix, I think Lady Luck was on our side today, Lewis. And for Lewis Hamilton, a lucky podium, he really was on his side.
Yeah, I think with everything that we've seen Mercedes do the past few years, and especially as, you know, they've had the last few constructors wrapped up really early, and, you know, apart from last year, we thought that they would have the jump on this year because they'd have so much extra time to think about this car and think about the regulations. But obviously, time doesn't mean anything, and they obviously have not gone the same direction as Ferrari. You know, we've seen all the side pod designs that they've all come out with, and their engine obviously does not seem to be up to standard, the same as Ferrari. So yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a struggle this season, and Lewis was very happy with that podium, and I think it's because he knew the maximum they would get is a 5.6, and even then it could have been worse than a 5.6 because we saw the pace of, you know, even Magnussen, which sounds crazy to say that a Haas could have been in front of a Mercedes, but yeah, I think definitely was on his side. He was very lucky in that race. I think something to think about is that it is down to luck, and people will say it's a lucky podium, but at the end of the day, the Mercedes car, the Mercedes engine made it, and the Red Bull didn't. Granted, it's a bit unlucky, but when it happens to 3 out of the 4 Honda engines, or Red Bull engines as they are, it is a bit down to luck. But then you've got to say, is that a fault Red Bull has made? Is that something they need to rectify? And if so, that's the sort of indication that, you know, you've got to be in it to win it. It doesn't matter if you're extremely fast and outperforming them, you've still got to finish the race. So yeah, Mercedes can be very happy with the 3-4 that they got, but it's going to be incredibly difficult for them to be getting podiums consistently unless we see that happen again, or, you know, incidents happening at the front. And Mercedes are obviously going to be bringing upgrades and working really hard because they have not been in this position since, you know, 2013. We've not seen them struggle at all. So I think this year is going to bring out a real different side to Mercedes and probably to Lewis Hamilton, because they're going to have to work extremely hard to get back up, even onto the podium, even to third place. So I think that's going to make it very exciting. And if Mercedes can develop their package and make that car faster and fix their problems, it will be incredible. But yeah, it's a very strange position that they're in because everybody expected them to do so well. And it's sort of the boy that cried wolf. We always expect, no pun intended with Toto Wolff, but we always expected them to come in, do a bit of sandbagging, at least get first or second row in quali. And that didn't happen at all. So this weekend was crazy for Mercedes, and the fact that Lewis was so happy with P3, he knows that it was lucky. He knows that that's not where that car should be, and its deserved place is P5, P6. But we know how determined they are to work harder, and I think it'll make the racing even more special and amazing for us this season if they can get up in the mix and make it a three-way fight.
I think it's safe to say, Lewis, that the biggest winners of these regulations, Haas Formula One team, they look like the 4th fastest team. They've put all of their money into this season. They've thrown everything at it. They got K-Mag back in the car, 5th place. What a race.
It's really, really, really good for Haas, and I'm not overestimating it. It's the best possible start they have had since, well, 2017, because obviously 2018 they had both tyre failures and the pit stops. It's great for K-Mag. I mean, after all the chaos they've had with obviously the thing that happened with Ukraine and all of that, we're not going to go into too much into it, and obviously the disaster with sponsorship and all of that, they needed a good solid driver to come in, not a rookie, not anyone. They needed K-Mag. He was the perfect driver to get in that car and deliver the results straight away. Because he's not driven a car for 14 months. It's a great proof of his talent. It just shows why he shouldn't have been sacked in the first place if it wasn't for the financial situation. Mick I'm just gonna say he was unlucky. He should have time to deliver. I would give him 6 races. I'm giving him 6 races before I say whether his season is A star or B plus or C grade or whatever. I expect a couple more points finishes from Haas before the summer break. I wouldn't expect regular points finishes, probably 2 to 3 before we hit Hungary and then our cheeky 3 week summer holiday.
I think all of us are certainly looking forward to this this summer holiday that's miles away in comparison to where we are now, but it will come pretty quickly. One thing, Harry, that hasn't come quick enough for Alfa Romeo is a return to the midfield. They haven't been there roundabout since 2018, 2019. Bottas comes in, Zhou comes in, double points finish, tick the boxes, Q3, amazing. And just to sweeten Bottas's weekend, out qualifying George Russell.
Yeah, I mean, it's going back to the whole Ferrari power engine, really. It seems that all the Ferrari cars, sorry, have been flying up this grid. I mean, Ferrari, of course, were battling for about P3 in the standings last year, and Alfa Romeo and Haas were fighting for the wooden spoon. It was shocking to see. I know that they've got probably an improvement in drivers in terms of the likes of Bottas and Magnussen coming back in. The Scandinavian duo they've performed at the top level this weekend, but one man who I am very impressed with as well is Zhou Guanyu. His qualifying wasn't spectacular, and during the start of the race, he dropped down to last. And to battle back, he made some brilliant overtakes as well. Watching him on track, it shows how well these cars can follow compared to last year's. Zhou Guanyu, especially on the brakes, looked very well placed, and he looked calm in that car, it was a real surprise. I think many of us thought that Alfa Romeo would be near the back, certainly not near the midfield, and many of us thought that it would only be 1 year for Zhou Guanyu and Théo Pourchaire will come straight back in next year. And that may be the case, but I think debut points for the only rookie on the grid is certainly something that you can be proud of. I mean, I don't think anyone would have predicted that top 10 going into Bahrain without any testing. I think that it was a shock for Alfa Romeo, but last year, you know how much I said it, Will, that they weren't the most exciting team on the grid. They were fighting for about 8th and 9th in the championship. They had an old world champion and Antonio Giovinazzi, not ridiculously exciting driver. I mean, their lineup now is completely different. They've got a hungry Valtteri Bottas, who's clearly showing that he's made for Formula One still and that he can fight in the upper echelons despite being in not necessarily the best car on the grid like he was for the past couple of years. And a rookie who we all thought would fail, really. We all thought he was going to be another pay driver, another Nikita Mazepin, and that Piastri should have got the seat. But Zhou Guanyu is coming, and I've been very impressed with him. I did vote for him for driver of the day, although in hindsight probably should have gone to K-Mag or Leclerc. But I think it was a brilliant performance, and Alfa Romeo can hold their heads high, and I would expect to see them, and especially Bottas, in that fight for the P7, P6, maybe even with battles up ahead going on for the rest of the season. It's certainly an exciting project out for Romeo, and it's the first time we've really seen them up there for a long time since Leclerc was there. So it's a certain change up for the books, and it's one we want to see, really. We didn't want to see the exact same grid and the exact same drivers and all in the same positions as they were last year. And with the new cars, the new regulations, it's been a revelation for teams like Haas and Alfa Romeo, and I'm glad to see them up there.
Harris, I don't know about you, but I was pretty unsure about Alpine heading into this season. Part of me thought they'd fall to the back, part of me thought they'd head to the front, part of me thought they would just stay exactly where they are, and in all honesty, I think that's exactly what they've done. They haven't improved, they haven't worsened, they're in there with the fight with AlphaTauri, just getting things done.
Yeah, I think during the race, we did not see a lot of them. I think apart from Ocon's penalty early on, they weren't really mentioned. I don't recall, Crofty saying too much about it or, focusing on their race. I think I remember Alonso saying he needed to pit earlier because the tyres were going off. But apart from that, they weren't really that noticeable. They haven't made any really big strides like Ferrari, but they haven't seemed to drop off like teams such as Aston Martin or McLaren. So they've remained pretty stagnant, which I'd say is quite rare when we have a bigger rule change as this, where they're still in the midfield. Obviously, they'd want to do much better and be fighting up there, but I think for where they are right now is a relatively good place to be in terms of new regulations in the middle, where, you know, they've got a good enough car to fight for points. They can develop it and try and, you know, get higher up in the order. And especially with Alonso there, who obviously has fit in well at that team and wants to help them improve the car and things for this new era of Formula One. I think it's a relatively good place for them to be at the start of this season.
Although it was McLaren who were running Google Chrome and Android sponsorship, it was AlphaTauri who were in incognito mode this weekend. They didn't, in all honesty, other than Gasly's blazing fiery end to his race and a good point score for Tsunoda, in all fairness to him. It's AlphaTauri's typical weekend, really. They didn't get the screen time. They didn't show off an amazing pace. They didn't. Exactly. I don't really know how to sum them up this race.
Give you one word, like you said, quiet. Solid though from Tsunoda. Him moving to Italy, being near Faenza, being near the team, being there every day is clearly developing him more as a driver, and is thankfully for me, because I quite like Tsunoda, taking Red Bull's finger off the panic button and swapping him out, for example, a Lawson or a Vips, perhaps. That fourth place in the Abu Dhabi finale, and I think it was 8th in Bahrain off the top of my head. If I'm wrong, correct me. Again, shows he's improving. Gasly, he drove well, he drove solidly, typical performance from Gasly until his car decided to become a toaster due to what I read was a rumoured MGUK failure.
So, the penultimate team on our list of all of the constructors is Williams, and Harry, they didn't go up, they didn't go back to the midfield, unfortunately, other than what I can say is a spectacular return to Formula One for Alex Albon, probably at the back of the grid.
Yeah, it's a shame to see, really. We thought that with their driver lineup changing, of course, George Russell going out to Mercedes and Albon coming back in, it will be an interesting new dynamic. Of course, Latifi and Albon have been teammates in F2 with Dams before, so they know each other well. And many people were expecting Latifi to outshine Alex Albon, really. I've seen a lot of it saying that Albon's overrated and that Latifi will beat him. Well, clearly not. It looks as though Williams are exactly the same as they were last year. There's possibility for points if all goes chaos ahead, which in some races, let's be honest, it's going to happen. It's Formula One. So there is still potential for points, but whether necessarily Albon and Latifi have the capabilities of pushing that car into points on a regular basis is yet to be seen. And I don't think that car has the capabilities of the likes of the Hasses, the Alfa Romeos, and even the Alpines, Alpha Tauris up ahead. So it's a struggle for Williams again. You thought that they made steps last year. Before they were rock bottom. Now they were starting to improve, and they've stayed stagnant again this year. It seems that the only thing they have done is change their drivers, and Albon seems to be performing at the exact same level as Russell was, and Latifi's still Latifi. It's a disappointing one for Williams, if I'm honest, and to be down there fighting with McLaren and Aston Martin, there's three big names within the sport as the bottom three, and we could see many of them out in Q1 again this year. So it's not great for Williams, if I'm honest. I would have liked to see them further up. I'd have liked to see the bottom three teams all further up fighting for points on a regular basis, but just with the race pace we saw, there was a massive gap in class between the cars and the drivers at the point. About halfway through the race, you could see that Williams was struggling. Albon got off to a good start. He was in a good grid position, but he couldn't find any pace, and the Alfa Romeos escaped him, and it just became a nightmare really for Williams. It's as it was for the two teams around them. So it's a tough one to call whether anything has changed in the Williams squad. I mean, is it a driver lineup change needed again? Maybe next year. Is Latifi still needed within F1? Is his money needed at Williams? Because despite his money and him being in the sport for a long time, Williams have not got where they want to with this supposed extra financial gaining that Latifi gives them. He doesn't really give them that much gaining on the track. So it's a tough one for Williams. And to have such a historic team on the grid still languishing at the bottom is a real shame. Now they're joined by two more historic British teams. So it's not a great start to the season for the British teams anyway, and especially not Williams either.
As Harry just said there, Maris, we hoped that the two British outfits, Williams, McLaren, would be fighting together. Not entirely sure this is what we meant. McLaren, an absolutely shambolic start to their season. In all honesty, at the back of the midfield, what can you say? They hope they'd be winning the title this year. They expected to be up near the top fighting with Ferrari, and while their old rivals have gone to the top, they've fallen to the back.
Yeah, it feels like I've sort of stepped into a wormhole back to 2017. And honestly, that was an awful time for McLaren. And the steps that they've made, the onwards and the upwards trajectory that they've been on since that appalling season in, 2017, 2018, it looks like they've, been gaining momentum. They got podiums, they got their win last year. And we saw them at testing and thought this could be their year. It could be McLaren and Williams, we wish, McLaren and Ferrari. And obviously they've come to Bahrain, and it seems as though everything we thought we saw in testing was sort of a lie, and we want them to do really well. But, for Daniel to not get out of Q1, I don't know whether that's because he was a bit unwell from, having COVID, or he's still struggling with the car, but him and, Lando didn't get into Q3. It's very disappointing for them. And obviously with how well they did last year and how well we thought they were going to do this year, it's a big disappointment to see them down there. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. It wasn't sort of a one-off. It didn't look like something was wrong with the cars. They were just not fast enough. And, the trend we've seen is that the three slowest teams seem to be the ones with Mercedes engines. And obviously that's not something McLaren can change, whether it's something Mercedes can help them get to grips with, or, whether they have to change the car more to make it faster if they can't do anything about the engine. We'll have to see. But it's a real shame for Lando and Daniel, because we know how good racers they are and how hungry they are to win with that team. And, being British, I want to see all the, the British teams do well, but this is obviously not what we wanted to see. And hopefully we can see them, improve and get better, but it is really looking unlikely. And it's only one race. We've seen them down, but it is really sad to see them fighting for, P17, P18. And yeah, Lando signing that new contract as well for the next few years. He's obviously going to have to work really hard with that team if he wants to get anywhere near, even a podium anymore.
Well, that's all the teams run and done for the Bahrain Grand Prix. Just one final thing to touch on, and I don't think there needs to be any discussion. Thank you, Formula One, for these new regulations. If every race this season can be as good as Bahrain, it's unlikely it will be. Bahrain has always been a fantastic circuit for racing. If we have a season like this, it will be a season for the ages. Just one final thing that I want to touch on here. I'll ask all three of you. I just want the name. Who do you think is going to win this weekend's Saudi Arabian Grand Prix? Lewis, let's hear from you first.
Magnussen. Still left field, but I feel it.
Straight out the box. I like it. Kevin Magnussen coming in. Great. Gunther Steiner's boat is your profile picture. Do you agree with him?
I wish I did agree with him. I'd love to see Haas on the top step of the podium, but I think it's going to be Max Verstappen. I think Verstappen on a bounce back weekend. I think Red Bull are going to be fueled, well, hopefully properly. And I think Verstappen's got the fight in him. I think he's going to take it back to Leclerc, and I think he'll win it in Jeddah.
I really do think for some reason that Carlos Sainz is going to up his game, because we saw how disappointed he was with P2 and qualifying P3. I genuinely think he is going to get to grips with this car and could pull out an amazing performance next weekend.
Oh, there we go. There's the opinions of our panelists today. And that's the question that's going out to you at home. Who do you think will win the 2022 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix? Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Maximum Downforce. Remember to check out all of our social media at Downforce Radio. You name it, we're on it. This podcast will be going out on all of your regular platforms, Spotify, Spreaker, Apple, whatever you listen to, we will be there. Please drop us a like, subscribe, whatever button helps us. It would be really, really appreciated. Have a wonderful afternoon, evening, morning, whenever, wherever you're listening to. Thank you very much. Goodbye.